Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Arunava. In this video, we're going to talk about classes and objects in Python. Assuming a basic familiarity with the Python syntax, let's start talking about objects and classes. This video is an introduction to OOP, which stands for Object-Oriented Programming. So what is Object-Oriented Programming? Well, it's just programming with the use of objects, which brings us to the question, what are objects? Well, in Python, an object is a collection of data and methods which acts on that data. And how do we represent such a collection in Python? We use class. Class is the blueprint of an object. Now, let's just take an example of an object. So if I say that an animal is an object, then the data, that is the variables of that object, would be like height, weight, color, eye color, number of legs, and so on. And what would be the methods, that is the functions that acts on that data? Well, it could be absolutely anything from as simple as a function named getHeight, which simply returns the height of the animal, to as complex as digest_food, which takes in food as the parameter and runs a few lines of code to help the animal digest food, and in the process increasing the weight and height. So let's now code a class in Python. This is an empty class. Where are the data and methods? Well, we will type it later. So here, this line of code says that it's creating an instance or object of the class. Recall that I said a class is a blueprint of an object. So for one type of object, we have one class, and we create an instance of that class for each object of that type. And then we tweak it according to the specifics of the object. Why blueprint? Why not have a class specific to each object? Well, in that case, if I have two dogs, both belong to the same object animal and both does almost the same things, then to represent such two dogs, if I use two classes, then I would be repeating a whole lot of code. And one of the primary goals of object-oriented programming is not to repeat code. So that's why we have blueprint for each type of object. And then how do I represent my two dogs? And say one of the things they differ in is the hair color. So as I said, we create an instance of the class, that is the blueprint, for each dog, and tweak it as needed, that is, make specific changes that belong to the object. In my dog's case, I will be tweaking the hair color variable, as I said, is different. So we have the blueprint, which is the class, and we use the blueprint to create instances. Cool. So now you know about instances or objects. The two words instances and objects can be used interchangeably, and the process of creating instances is called instantiation. Now we can have data, that is variables, inside the class, like has legs, something else too, and this is a data. And methods, and we can access the variables using the class name like this. Let's run this and see. So you can see that we are able to access these variables with ease. So animal.hasLegs prints true, animal.something else prints false, animal.something else too prints 34, and animal.this is a data prints the string which is it assigned to in the class. These attributes are called the class attributes, and just ignore the self parameter in the method for now. We'll come to that later. Do note that we are not calling the method this is a func inside the class using the class name, as that would result in an error. So let's try it out and see. So you can see that we are getting an error. Alright, so basically to use, that is to call methods that is inside a class, we need to create an instance of that class, as we will see later on. Let's now have a special method inside the class called init. Methods with double underscores at the beginning and at the end are special methods. Init is a special method which is called the constructor. What is a constructor? Well, simply speaking, it is the method which gets called each time when you create an instance of a class. And while instantiating, the arguments you pass are passed to the constructor, that is the init method. So 23 will be passed to the weight parameter, 56 to the height, ABCD to name, and yellow to hair color. Good. This brings us to the obvious question, what is the self parameter at the beginning? So let's start by calling this is a func method of the class using the objects we created, that is D1 and D2. We can see that we are calling the method without passing the value for the self argument. And we can see that it's running without any errors. So we can safely say that self is passed automatically to the method inside a class by Python. Now what is self? It is the instance on which the method is called. So whenever a method is called on an instance of a class, then the instance is itself passed to the method as the first argument. So a method call like d1.getHeight is translated into animal.getHeight and passing d1 as the first argument. So you can see that the class name is used to call the method and Python just passes the object implicitly as the first argument on which the method is called. That's simple. Cool. You now know about what the self parameter is. Do note you can call the self parameter whatever you want, but it's a convention to call it self. And it also gives you an intuitive feel of what it actually represents. Also note that these attributes are called the instance attributes. Alright, let's now take a look at what we are doing inside the init method. So these arguments are passed when we are initializing the instance of the class. And look at what we are doing with those arguments here. We are setting the variables that belong to the instance pass, that is the self parameter, equal to the arguments that are passed while initializing the object. And this is how we perform initialization. So the arguments passed are now stored in the variables that belong to the object passed. Note the variables that belong to an object are also called the attributes of that object. So here the attribute weight of the object passed is set to the value of the weight parameter that we passed while initializing the object. Next, the height attribute of the object is set to the value of the height parameter that got passed while initializing the object, right? So then the hair color attribute of the object is set to the value of the hair color parameter that got passed, and the name attribute of the object is set to the value of the name parameter that got passed. So we just initialize the object inside init by setting all the required attributes of the object with the values which were passed as arguments to the constructor while initializing the object. Cool, you now know how the initialization of an object is done. Next, let's quickly look at how to access these attributes and methods of an object. Well, nothing too new. You already saw that we are accessing the methods using the dot operator as in here. And to access the attributes, actually you can do pretty much the same thing. That is, just access it using the dot operator. And now, if I run this, you can see that it prints the attributes specific to each object. Alright, you can now access attributes specific to an object. Note, you can also access the attributes directly defined under the class. That is, the class attributes using the object. So you are able to access these successfully as we are not running into any type of errors. Also, changing these attributes in one object doesn't affect the other. As you can see, so the first print says 4 as we set its value to 4, while the second says true, which is set when it got initialized. Okay, so congratulations, you now know about classes and objects in Python. Alright, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed the video, do give it a thumbs up and do share it with your friends and do subscribe. Okay, bye-bye, take care and have a great day. See you all next time.